Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the session for relying party acceptance of MDL. It's a little bit different than maybe what we've heard about so far in the conference, so I'm really excited to share this with you. It is a short session, it's a lot of information, so I'm going to breeze through it pretty quickly. I'm also very mindful I'm standing between you and lunch, so thank you for coming. My name is Mindy Stevens. I'm the Manager of Identity Management at the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. I'll go over who AAMVA is here in just a second. So we're going to talk about AAMVA, talk a little bit about standards, provide a very high-level MDL overview. We're going to talk about relying party trust, and then we'll talk about the digital trust service that AAMVA is working on. So very quickly, AAMVA is a nonprofit association that develops model programs for highway safety, basically. So your motor vehicle agencies, your law enforcement, your driver licensing agencies. We serve as an international spokesman and information clearinghouse for these interests. Our primary membership is the 51 U.S. jurisdictions, 5 U.S. territories, and 13 Canadian provinces. In addition to our primary membership, we also have a little over 150 associate members, as well as partnerships with the federal entities. AAMVA also serves as the leader for standards work and for driver license and ID cards in North America. We serve on both domestic as well as international committees. And recently, in the fall of last year, AAMVA published a new version of the Mobile Driver License Implementation Guidelines. This document is to be used by U.S. and Canadian jurisdictions to assist them with their mobile driver license implementations. This document's meant to be used in addition to, not instead of, the ISO standard, which we'll go over here a little bit in a second. The document effectively assists our jurisdictions in achieving technical interoperability for their programs, so that there can be trust for MDLs across North America. It has privacy-preserving guidance for implementations, and it helps with provisioning guidance. Okay, perfect. So the International Organization of Standardization is working on some MDL standards through 2 different groups. The first group, WG10, is the group that's responsible for the driver license and ID card standards. And last fall, they just published Part 5 of that standard, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The other group is WG4, which is an identity building blocks working group, and they're effectively working on the provisioning standard that we're looking forward to. So the what we call Phase 1 for the attended use case, or the 18013 Part 5 ISO standard, was published last fall, I want to say September, end of September, early October. Oh, there we go. The group is also working on Phase 2 for the unattended use case, and so unattended would be using your MDL online. So attended is something you're doing in person, and then the unattended would be using that online, and it looks a little bit different. So the group is currently working on that. And then that WG4 working group is working on provisioning, which is how you get the MDL onto the device securely, and that standard's also being worked on. Today we'll be focusing on the, I went a little bit too fast. Today we'll be focusing on the attended use case. Okay? Also, for purposes of this presentation, when we say mobile driver license, we mean a solution that's compliant with the 18013 Part 5 standard. If you guys have seen stuff, you've seen early pilots, or you've seen some of what the jurisdictions have had out there, especially those before the standard was available, some of them look and feel a little bit different, they work a little bit different, and many of them only work within the jurisdiction that they were issued in. So they're not necessarily interoperable, and no fault to those early adopters because the standard wasn't available yet. So the jurisdictions that have a solution that's not compliant with the standard are working towards having and offering a compliant solution. So just before we get started, because everyone's understanding of MDL is a little bit different because of the variety of stuff that's out there, when I say MDL, I do mean those as defined by the standard. Okay, so what MDL is, MDL basically leverages the device to have your information that's on your physical credential today. So the information from your physical credential, all the same attributes, are securely stored in a container on your mobile device. It's important to note that MDL is an extension of a physical credential, so at least for the foreseeable future, is not going to replace physical credentials. So issuing authorities are still going to have to issue a physical credential, and people are still going to have to carry them around, at least until such a time where most issuers are issuing and most relying parties are accepting the mobile credential. The thought process is, or the hope is, though, that if a relying party has the capacity of accepting a mobile credential, they would prefer that over the physical if the person could offer either one. Okay, what MDL is not, and this is, if you leave with nothing else today, please leave with this. MDL is not a picture of a driver license on your phone. To go beyond that, it's also not showing somebody data about you on your phone, even if it doesn't look like your physical credential. It's also not scanning a PDF 417 barcode off your phone like you would today with your physical credential. MDL is an electronic transmission of data from a holder device to a reader device, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The idea of having information on your phone that you show to somebody, even if you have fancy little features where the head moves or the text wobbles when you move your finger over it, those are some of the features that in the early days people tried to put in to kind of mimic security features that we have on our physical cards. But that is easily counterfeited. So when we start thinking about MDL and if we're having a solution where we show someone something, the potential for counterfeits and the risk for that is unscalable. It'll be way worse than what we have today with our physical credentials. No, doesn't like me. So the concept of MDL is basically MDL, you have a holder device, and that holder device electronically transmits information to a reader device. And then that reader device will go ahead and authenticate the information it received using the jurisdiction's public key certificate. And that's what we'll be talking about a lot more at the end of this presentation today. To go into that in just a little more detail, and again, this is a very high-level overview. The MDL solution kind of consists of three entities. You have your issuing authority infrastructure. It says infrastructure because that's going to include the digital trust service that we're going to talk about towards the end of the slides today. You have your MDL holder with their app or wallet solution. And then you have the relying party or the verifier with their app or wallet solution or hardware solution that has the right technologies to be able to consume a mobile driver license. So before transaction time, a few things have to happen. The issuing authority has to provision the credential to the person's device. The issuing authority also has to make their public key certificate available to relying parties so that relying parties can authenticate the MDL information after they consume it. At transaction time, there's a connection made between two devices. The MDL reader device will connect with the MDL holder device by one of two technologies. That's either done with the NFC or reading a QR code. Once there's a connection made between the devices, the MDL reader can then go ahead and request whatever information they need for the transaction from the MDL holder. And the MDL holder then goes in and consents what data out of what's requested that they'd like to share. So if the MDL reader requested name, date of birth, and address, and they only want to share their name and date of birth, they would uncheck the address or whatever that looks like in their app, and they would only send over the data that they wanted to send for that transaction. So once they consent to the data sharing, there's my request. The data is then electronically transmitted over to the reader's device, and then the reader authenticates that MDL information using the issuing authority's public key certificate. So I am a very high level, but drilling down just a little bit more. Maybe not. Okay. So MDL use, when we talk about use cases, I think we fail to kind of remember all the places we use our driver licenses and ID cards today, at least in the US and Canada. We use our driver licenses and ID cards issued by the state a lot. For everything, to purchase liquor, to buy a drink, to enter a bar or nightclub, go through a security checkpoint, or to a concert, pick up a prescription. If we get pulled over, we have to have information when we enroll our kids in school or when we check into a hotel, when you're getting married, when you're renting an apartment, when you're buying a house. All these different things require you to show proof of ID, and people are pulling out their driver licenses and ID cards to do that. So what we want to see, obviously, is that MDL, the relying parties, would get on board and be able to consume the MDL instead of the physical credential for all the common use cases that the credentials are used for today. So talking a little bit about physical driver license, relying party trust. So what is the model that we have today? We have these physical driver licenses and ID cards provided to us by our issuing authorities. And again, like I mentioned, we're using them everywhere. So that trust exists between the relying party and between the person that's holding that. It exists because the relying party knows that the document was issued by a genuine issuing authority, at least as far as they can tell. They're confident with that. And they know that the issuing authority has good practices in place because they're government. They don't necessarily know whether or not that person was required to show a birth certificate or passport or social security card or how many proofs of residency. They don't really care about that. They trust it because it came from a genuine issuing authority. They also know that the issuing authority is following different industry standards for producing those driver licenses and ID cards. They do a matching to the best extent they can today between the person, because everything with your physical credentials is an intended use case. So they match you with the picture on the credential and determine that you're the holder for that credential. And then they authenticate that the credential came from a genuine issuing authority by looking for security features on the card. And so that's the hard part, right? Textile features, micro print, little hollow windows, UV features on the back. A lot of different features that issuing authorities are spending a lot of money putting into their cards to make them more secure, to try to curb counterfeiting, and renewing their designs every 2 years to try to keep up with that. Unfortunately, the counterfeiters are pretty darn good, and it doesn't take them long to provide convincing duplicates, or not duplicates, but replicas of the authentic credentials that the issuing authorities are using. So your average relying party doesn't have the right training to determine whether a physical credential is genuine or not. The counterfeits are convincing, nor do they have the time to sit there and look for those features, even if they knew what they were. And then the last part is they couldn't keep up with all the different designs from the different issuing authorities, putting out new versions of those every 2 years. So it's kind of an impossible system that we have today for authentication of the physical credentials. Looking at that, moving forward with mobile driver license, what are the differences? So what we'd like to see is that we maintain that existing trust that exists today. Relying party trusts the credential from the issuing authority because they know it came from an actual issuing authority, and they trust the issuing authority has good practices to issue that credential to the user or the holder. So we'd like to see that trust continues forward with the mobile credential. Again, the mobile credential is an extension of that physical credential. So there's no reason why they shouldn't still trust a product that came from the issuing authority. They also have more assurance because of the benefits and the features of the mobile credential, because the information can be updated more in real time, because of the electronic cryptography that's available. Oh, nope. It helps with the timeliness for authenticating the credentials. So again, relying parties don't need to be trained on what security features to look for. They don't need to take the time to sit there and look for UV features or tactile prints. As soon as they get that issuing authority's public key certificate and the app verifies that it matches, that document's been authenticated and that work's done for them. So it's a lot more timely and more assuring solution. It's effectively better than the physical. So we say it's an extension of the physical, not putting down our physical credentials. There's a lot of hard work and security that go into those as well. But overall, especially from a relying party's perspective, what we're looking at is a solution that's much better because that authentication happens immediately in real time, and it doesn't require any special training for the relying parties to know that it came from a genuine issuing authority and that it hasn't been tampered with since it was put on the secure container on that device. So what is a trust model? If you're familiar with the 18013 Part 5 standard, you're probably familiar with a term called VICAL. I'll probably mess it up. Verified Issuer Certificate Authority List. Close enough? I see Andrew, no. Is effectively a list of the issuing authority's public keys that can be distributed to relying parties so that they can go ahead and verify those mobile credentials like we showed on the overview earlier. And so kind of what that looks like, and in this model here, we have our issuing authorities off to the one side and our relying parties off to the other, and then we've got this digital trust service in the middle. And so what the digital trust service would do, it would collect public key certificates from the different relative issuing authorities, again, for what AAMVA is looking to build. We would collect it from the US and Canada if they have mobile solutions. In addition to collecting the keys, the digital trust service would verify that the origin of those certificates were good. So we'll confirm that it's a valid, genuine, bona fide issuing authority we're getting those public keys from and putting them into the digital trust service. So this prevents from any false issuing authorities being able to get their keys in there. We'll also make sure that the quality of those certificates is up to par. So not all certificates are made equal. So the jurisdictions, in order to get their certificates into the digital trust service, are going to have certain maintenance and issuance as a certificate authority for their certificates that they're issuing to get them into this digital trust service. And then lastly, we'll make sure that the issuing authorities are following an agreed upon set of best practices. And we'll talk about that on the next slide, because what those are yet is still kind of being determined. But we'll make sure that whatever other jurisdictions and industry decide what good looks like, that they're meeting those requirements to get their keys entered into the digital trust service. All of that so relying parties know that they can trust the list that they get from this digital trust service that AAMVA puts out. And effectively, once the digital trust service has the keys, those keys would be distributed. Oh, good grief. No, back. Those keys would be distributed to the relying parties publicly. So relying parties would just go pull the public list from the trusted source. In this case, it would be AAMVA. And then they'd be able to use those public keys to authenticate the MDL products that they're transacting with. AAMVA's digital trust service, so we're currently working on developing a minimally viable product digital trust service that's intended for the issuing authorities in the US and Canada, as I said before. It's anticipated to go live by the end of this year, so jurisdictions that have products that can pass all those checks we just talked about on the prior slide can put their public key into the digital trust service, and AAMVA would distribute that to the relying parties for those jurisdictions so that their public key could be made available and help with the adoption and acceptance of their mobile products. We've also, in order to kind of frame what that looks like, we've developed a steering committee. And the steering committee is working on developing governance policies for issuing authorities so that they can get their keys into the trust service. So I mentioned that before on the prior slide. What do those things look like? Some of the things that the group's talked about so far, obviously, 18013 Part 5 compliance. Your solution has to comply with the industry standards that we're working on, that we're agreeing upon as a community is the right way to go and are interoperable. And then in addition to that, you have to comply with the AAMVA MDL implementation guidelines is another thing that's being discussed, because again, that's to be used in addition to the ISO standard so that the solutions across the US and Canada can be interoperable and trusted, because we've got a couple of unique things that we have to cover that's not in that international standard. And then the last thing that they're kind of talking about is, how do you confirm that someone's following these standards? Do we say that a self-certification is okay? Or do we actually make people go through a proper third-party certification, program to vet their products before they're allowed into the DTS? So that's some of the things that the group's talking about. And in addition to that, apart from standards, they're also talking about what other policies and procedures need to be in place for issuing authorities to potentially get your keys into that digital trust service. And that's an area that's not been as thoroughly discussed yet by the steering committee, but those would be just other issuance practices that they say this is what good looks like. And so whatever that list of things comes out to be or shakes out to be, at least for the MVP, jurisdictions would need to follow to get their keys into the service. And the MVP is a learning opportunity. So as we see how this works with issuing authorities, with relying parties, how the requirements to get into the DTS worked, we'll be able to make whatever changes before we go ahead and put out the full-blown model of the digital trust service, which will come after the fact. That brings me to the end of my slides. I'm sorry if that was fast. My contact information is on the screen. I think these slides will be distributed. You're welcome to email me, and I will send you a PDF version of them as well with the speaker's notes. And with that, I'm open to, I'm open to questions if you guys have any. Oh my goodness. What did I do? Click on what? Oh, play. Okay, I see it. No? Okay, it's fine. They can fix it later. Okay, questions? Oh, goodness. Andrew.
Thanks, Mindy. That was a great presentation and representation of the work in ISO.
Oh, he's going to bring you a mic.
Thanks, Mindy. That was a very good presentation of the work that's being done in ISO. Really reflects the work that's gone in. How are you finding, have you found any jurisdictions in North America that are choosing a different way other than the ISO 18013? Or are they waiting and seeing? Or are you seeing direct steps in different directions?
So that's a great question. As I kind of mentioned earlier in the slides, there are some early adopters, right? A couple jurisdictions, because of their governor or someone coming down from the top or whatever, wanted to provide something to their citizens that didn't align with the standard. Again, no fault to them. There's being first has really great points, and then it has some not great points. So now that the standard's available, those jurisdictions that have put out products that don't exactly align with the standard, or part of it aligns with the standard, but there's this other option in the app to maybe share it a little bit differently that doesn't exactly, meet the vision for what we talk about when we talk about MDL. Those jurisdictions are working towards having those fully standards compliant solutions. So I know at least in the US, a few jurisdictions that do have something that looks a little bit different, works a little bit different. They are working to standardize that, and so far Canada doesn't have any active implementations, but there is conversations and some movement for MDL from them as well. Oh, you, sir?
Hi. You talk about driving licenses. Do these standards also apply to state IDs that for not for driving? And also, do you do anything with, say, tribal or First Nations identification as well?
That's a great question. So the standard does say MDL. Effectively, the group created a standard for mobile identity. So absolutely is extended to an ID card. The concept of is basically you have your personal identifiable information, which is your identity, and then your driving privileges are kind of just an attribute that rides along with that. So absolutely can have a state-issued ID card. As far as the tribal cards, if they wanted to purchase the 18013 Part 5 standard and build a solution that aligned with that, they could do so. The standard's available for purchase, but that's not something that AAMVA monitors or regulates, would be those tribal IDs. Back here. So right now, and I thought I had a status map on here, I guess I didn't include it. We have probably about 6 or 7 jurisdictions that have a solution that either meets the bar or will meet the bar by the time the DTS is up and running. But there is a huge increase of interest amongst US jurisdictions since the standard was published in the fall, and even since the early March when AAMVA held an MDL pop-up classroom on the topic. And so we're seeing a lot of movement, and just depending on what type of solution the jurisdiction is looking to put in place and what kind of legislative barriers they have and where they were at in the process before all that would be how soon they can move. But there may be activity going on that they haven't even made us aware of. So we may see some additional ones pop up, but probably looking at half a dozen or a little bit more by the time the service is available.
Hey, thank you for the great presentation, and looking forward to working with you on MDL in the future. In the past, I had done some work with PKI and cross-certifying to the federal bridge for like DOD and federal government for PIV. We would like, as a financial services institution, we would like to avoid self-certification if possible. So I did download the spec, but I haven't had time to read through it all. Have they identified who the certifying authorities will be, or the auditors, effectively?
So there are definitely some industry partners in the space that are working on those certifications, what they would look like, what those tests would need to be to determine what's compliant. I know so far, I think I could say this, UL certified Iowa's product not too long ago. Iowa's not gone live with it, but they certified that to be standards compliant. But they're definitely not the only ones in the space. So we'll definitely see, some different industry partners pop up that can offer that third-party certification.
I have a privacy-related question on your slide that quite nicely showed the 25 different types of relying parties. What is being considered in terms of not asking for strong credentials when strong credentials or detailed credentials are not strictly required? So in other words, there's a burden now that the transaction is digital and so easily stored by the relying parties and shared with others under laws that are very weak in terms of data reuse and purpose of reuse, and we don't have GDPR where purpose is required, for instance. What is being done on the privacy side to avoid this becoming a huge increase in collected information, because individuals will simply reply with everything on that particular mobile driver's license, even when it's completely inconsequential?
So there's a few things, and again, the mobile driver license implementation guidelines, which is publicly available on AAMVA's site, does have some privacy guidance for jurisdictions, so you're welcome to go and read that. There's a few different aspects of the solution that touch on privacy, and I definitely don't have time to get to all of them today. As far as data sharing, the standard supports data minimization and selective information release. And so if I'm going to, our favorite use case is a bar to buy a drink. Today, I give the bartender my entire driver license. They get all the information on it. My height, my weight, my address, they scan the back. Huh? Okay, I'm getting there. Today, a lot of bars do have the PDF 417 scanners, and they'll read the back of your card, or they take it and they do that visual inspection. In addition to data minimization, there's selective information release. So a relying party can, again, ask me for my name, date of birth, and my address. And when I receive that request, I can say, you don't need my address. I'm going to give you my name and date of birth and send that over. And then it's up to the relying party if they want to still give me whatever I was trying to get with the transaction, having given them less data, but I have the control as the holder to say that I don't want to share that information with you. Jurisdictions are working on how to educate the public on how to better protect themselves. In addition to that, if the relying party needs to, for whatever reason, store the data that they're receiving as a part of the transaction, they're supposed to receive consent as a part of the transaction in order to store it and which data elements they would be storing. Jurisdictions are further required to look at their legislation and see what kind of laws they have in place or what laws they need to put in place to try to help protect the misuse of data that would be shared digitally. So again, not a new problem because we're sharing that credential information today in a lot of different ways where someone's going into the back and photocopying our credential, or they're scanning the back with their scanner and they're getting all that information anyway. And so it's not necessarily a new problem, but we are working on better ways to solve it with mobile driver license. And as far as what was your other question? Jurisdictions are working on that. Did you want to add to that, Andrew?
Yeah.
Oh.
If you want the state of Florida, I have the MDL there, and if you want to download the reader on your phone for age verification, they do a minimum data set. It's just your picture and a green check. There are no other data elements. And so if you want, we could talk about CCPA and GDPR. We can talk about that. Actually, Florida's done a halfway decent job in their implementation.
Yes, they have.
I have additional information to respond to that. Kentera Initiative, another nonprofit in the space, digital identity space, has an active working group defining requirements for, in big air quotes, good behavior of issuers, software application developers, and relying parties. Of course, they don't have teeth because they're recommendations, but the idea is that a certification program could be built using those requirements, and that's down the way. Now, I know that's not an immediate thing, but that is a positive action that's being done to at least inform relying parties of what the expectations are for data retention.
Thank you. I think Christina, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Mindy. One quick forward-looking question. You had a timeline, attended, unattended, provisioning. So you said attended is end of this year. Is there any timeline for unattended and provisioning too?
So the unattended is going to be published as a technical standard instead of a full standards document. So I know the process for that is a lot shorter turnaround time, and I think the group's hoping to wrap that up within the next year or so. Andrew, do you have a better timeline? I miss it. Yeah, it's subjective. As far as the provisioning standard, I know that group has had different kind of shifting timelines. So I don't have a good ETA on when the provisioning standard would be available. But in the meantime, for the jurisdictions in the US and Canada and any other body that would like to pull the implementation guidelines off our website, AAMVA does offer provisioning guidance in the meantime to jurisdictions for their implementations.
Outstanding presentation. Thank you very much. Could you just comment a little bit on the international aspects of it? I mean, I'm guessing you're in discussion with various other groups internationally, and I'm just curious if some sort of global DTS or some kind of federation of DTSs is under discussion. What are your sort of early thoughts on the internationalization?
Oh, thank you for that. So AAMVA does work with our counterparts across the world. So there's AAMVA-like organizations in other parts. We work with the EREG, which is kind of the European AAMVA, as well as AusRoads, which is the Australian AAMVA, and then other countries and organizations and jurisdictions. As you saw from kind of the country map alone, those countries that are involved with the standards work are significant. So there are several different countries that are contributing to the standards work. AAMVA also is a consultant for the working party at the UN that's talking about digital driver permits and international driver permits. They're a little bit slower to grasp the concept, so they're kind of still in a learning phase, but we're working on that tactic and approach as well. Right now, to my understanding, from what I've heard and what I've seen, our counterparts from around the world are looking to the US and what we're doing to kind of model after that. And once the US has their digital trust service and other countries, or maybe the EREG and the AusRoads have their digital trust service, they can sign each other's lists so you know which lists are trustable. We've also planted the seed at the UN for the potential of having, a more global digital trust service, but again, they're not there yet. I don't know if anyone else from WG10 has more information about what that looks like. Any other questions? No? It's lunchtime? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have another one?
This is in the nature of a comment because a lot of your presentation is dependent on privacy terms, on selective disclosure capability that's built into these apps, the wallets. And in general, when you're using your credential, your strong credential 20, 30 times a day, maybe in some cases, this idea that users will go through the process of examining the requests in order to provide selective disclosure, even if the parties, the relying parties, are being, kind in not asking for too much, is not really sustainable because you're adding to the burden of the user or the holder, maybe a lot, maybe a little, and that has to be dealt with.
So again, we're back to educating the public on how to better protect themselves. They already don't protect themselves well today. I know I probably don't. I want whatever's at the end of that rainbow. I need the transaction to happen. I can't be inconvenienced by it not going well, so I'll hand over my credential. It's probably not the right thing to do, So we can all learn how to protect our own selves a little bit better, and jurisdictions need to work on how to better educate the public to protect themselves. And then in addition to that, what things that they can do to protect the public, again, from themselves. So there's a lot of talk about things that could be put in the app about, this particular type of relying party typically would need this level of information. So if they're asking you for more than that, maybe that raises a red flag. Again, we want to be better than where we are today, but today we hand over everything, and we do it so willingly everywhere we go because we need whatever service is at the end of the transaction. So we are trying to get better, but we're not creating new problems. This is an existing problem that we already have today. Oh, right here, Mike. Did I lose my mic runner?
I can speak really loud.
He's coming. He's like, darn it, you people, I thought you were done.
Sorry, man. Yeah, it's a great presentation, thank you. So in regards to DTS, do you envision more than one DTS per area, or will AAMVA be the DTS to aggregate all these certs for relying partners?
So for the US and Canada,
Yeah.
we're hoping that all of our jurisdictions will meet the requirements to play in the sandbox, and we will serve the DTS for North America. Okay. Again, our counterparts around the world are looking to what we're doing to kind of do the same thing, and then what that ends up looking like in the long run, I'm not sure if those will be cross-signed lists, or if at some point we'll move to, more of like a global master list.
Yeah, I just meant for like North America.
Yeah, for North America. The only difference would be if you have a jurisdiction that doesn't meet the requirements to play in the sandbox, They might make their public key available on their website or something, and relying parties have to go get it from them separately. But as far as the DTS that AAMVA is putting together, it would serve North America and Canada.
Okay. Will there be a fee to accessing those public certs?
We don't have the fee model figured out just yet.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Back here.
Do you see this like being a precursor for possibly a digital passport? Or is there somebody else working on that?
So there is mobile passport. It doesn't work in the way that there is mobile driver license. We work with ICAO. I know that there's some interest in the space, but I haven't had any recent conversations with them. I'm not sure if any of my friends from the standards group in the room have. So it would make sense that they could leverage the same standard to achieve the same thing. Yeah. Yeah. And we've had conversations with other entities. I've met with DOD, I've met with other federal entities that are interested in leveraging the standard for their own types of credentials, even if it's that just their employees' access cards, to do away with that. And you would, scan a mobile version of that instead, and have that be interoperable or work in other ways. And so there are other entities and agencies and federal agencies that are interested in leveraging the standard for non-DLID purposes, but I wouldn't know all of, what that looks like apart from the people that we've met with. So, yeah. That would be up to the issuing authority that you're getting it from. So again, the mobile credential is an extension of the physical credential. There's obvious reasons why they won't give you multiple physical credentials, right? You can loan one to your friend and they go on their merry way and use it. With a mobile credential, if there's a right security in place to access that app or that wallet on the phone, your friend shouldn't be able to do it even if you've got it on your phone and your tablet and your laptop, right? Because it's the same credential, it's just across different devices. It's not the same thing as a duplicate or multiple physical credentials, but it will be up to the issuing authority whether or not they'll allow that. And it goes beyond that, how many mobile credentials you can have on a single device. Some people might want to put their kids' credentials on their device, or they have an elderly parent that they care for. So those are all conversations that are happening. There's some information in the implementation guidelines, but those are conversations that have to happen at the individual issuing authority level for them to decide what their solution looks like and how to work. Anyone else? Oh, there's lunch. Okay. Thank you guys so much. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.